Have you ever felt the weight of being seen, yet never truly known? It's strange, isn't it? How we can move through life surrounded by voices, gestures, even love, and still carry an ache we can't name. Not loneliness exactly, but a sense that something essential is missing. Not from the world, but from ourselves. Here's the paradox. The more we try to become who we're supposed to be, the further we drift from who we truly are. Nietzsche once warned, "Be careful when casting out your devils that you do not cast out the best thing in you." And Jung echoed this haunting truth. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. What if your chaos isn't a flaw, but a message? What if the shadows you're running from are not enemies, but invitations? This isn't about fixing yourself. It's about finding yourself in the ruins, in the longings, in the mirrors you didn't know you were holding. So if your heart has ever whispered, "There must be more than this," you're right, there is. Stay with me. The unraveling begins now. Number 1. He's not in love, he's in projection. There's a moment, silent, almost imperceptible, when a man looks at you and you feel something shift. You think it's love, maybe even destiny. But what if I told you, it's not? What he feels for you might not be about you at all. Not your smile, not your mind. Not the way you tilt your head when you're curious or the way your voice softens in the dark. What he's really in love with is a piece of himself, a shadow, a forgotten hunger, a part of his psyche he's never met until you walked in and awakened it without even trying. Carl Jung called it projection. See, every man carries inside him an image of the feminine, not just any woman, but an ancient internal archetype, the anima. She's not a memory of an ex, not a fantasy drawn from media, but something far older, something mythic. She is softness, danger, nurturing, chaos, mystery, all in one. She's his emotional mirror, and she lives in his unconscious. You became the screen. When your presence evokes something primal, when your energy matches the texture of that inner anima, he doesn't just notice you. He feels haunted by you, addicted even, but not to your touch or your laugh. He's addicted to the feeling you stir, the sensation of meeting himself in a way he never has. And that right there is why it all feels so intense. He calls you his soulmate, tells you you're unlike anyone he's ever met, swears you feel familiar even though you barely know each other. You wonder how something so deep could happen so fast. You want to believe it's real. And maybe for a moment it is. But then something shifts. He pulls back. He ghosts you. He looks at you one day and doesn't recognize the woman he swore he couldn't live without. Why? Because you were never you in his eyes to begin with. You were the vessel, the symbol, the myth. And when the illusion cracks, when you say or do something that doesn't match the image he projected onto you, he panics. His unconscious recoils. Because you've broken the spell. You weren't his anima. You were just the first woman who mirrored it back at the right angle. This is where so many women get hurt, especially the ones who are emotionally rich, spiritually open, intuitively alive. You're not trying to seduce, you're simply present. And that's exactly what makes you dangerous to the unconscious man. In the comment sections of videos like this, you'll see the patterns echo again and again. He was obsessed. Then one day he just disappeared. He called me magic, now he acts like I never existed. I didn't do anything wrong, I was just me. And that's the truth, isn't it? You weren't manipulative, you weren't playing games, you simply were. And in doing so, you activated something he didn't know how to face. It's important to say this clearly. You are not to blame. You did not seduce him into fantasy. His psyche did that all on its own. All you did was breathe in a way that echoed his longing. All you did was exist, with depth, with softness. with mystery, and his unconscious lit up like a fire in the dark. But projection is unstable. It burns hot and collapses fast, because no one can live inside someone else's fantasy forever. You can't love a mirror. You can only love a person. So if you've ever wondered why you keep drawing in intense connections that disappear as quickly as they arrive, this may be why. You're not cursed, you're not too much. You're simply playing a role that his unconscious wrote long before he met you. And he's not in love with you. He's in love with what you made him feel about himself. Understanding this is painful, but it's also freeing, because the next time someone looks at you with eyes full of fire, you'll ask, is he seeing me or something inside him he hasn't yet claimed? And that question might save you years of heartbreak. Let's keep going. In the next part, we'll uncover how emotional contrast, not charm, not beauty, awakens a man's deep brain and makes him feel alive in your presence, often without even knowing why. Number 2, the emotional crescendo. How to trigger his dopamine. It's not always your beauty. It's not the way you dress or even the words you say. Sometimes what pulls a man in, what makes him feel like he's on fire and floating all at once, is something far less visible, far less obvious. It's contrast, emotional contrast. Think about it. He's laughing with you one moment. The world feels light. He forgets about time. Then suddenly the laughter fades. Your eyes settle into something quieter. The conversation shifts into silence, not an awkward one, but a charged, mysterious kind of stillness. And he can't look away. That's emotional crescendo. The rise and fall, the expansion and contraction. It's not just about making him feel good. It's about making him feel alive, unexpected, unpredictable, rich. Carl Jung once said, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." But in the same breath, we could say, there's no depth without contrast. The mind remembers shifts. The nervous system craves variety. When something catches us off guard emotionally, it leaves an imprint. We don't remember what made us feel fine. We remember what made us feel everything. This is why he thinks about you days after seeing you. It's not because you were sweet or nice or agreeable. It's because you stirred contrast. You brought the spark and the stillness, the ease and the enigma. You laughed without trying, and then, without warning, dropped into a story that carried grief. He didn't see it coming. And that's the point. See, our brains aren't wired to crave pleasure. They're wired to chase dopamine, and dopamine doesn't respond to comfort. It responds to novelty, to the thrill of the unknown. That's why we rewatch scenes in movies that broke us open. That's why people stay in toxic relationships, because the highs and lows become a kind of chemical addiction. But here's where it gets dangerous. Once you understand this, it's tempting to turn it into a tactic. To think, maybe I should pull away. Maybe I should go cold after warmth. Maybe I should engineer emotional whiplash. Don't. Because the moment it becomes performance, it loses its magic. True emotional contrast isn't something you do, it's something you are when you stop flattening your edges to be palatable. It's what happens when you allow your full range of expression to be present, without apology, without explanation. You don't need to play games. You are already a symphony. You've been told to pick a role. The nurturing woman, the mysterious one, the carefree flirt, the stoic intellectual. But what if you didn't choose? What if you let all of them live inside you and show up as they wish? That's what a man remembers. Not the smile that stayed the same, but the way it broke, just slightly, when you thought of something you couldn't say out loud. He remembers the way you looked away mid-sentence, the sudden softness that suggested something deeper than words. He remembers how you changed the room without touching a thing, because in that moment he wasn't chasing you. He was chasing a feeling he hadn't felt before, or hadn't felt in years. And that feeling, my friend, is power. Not the kind that controls, but the kind that awakens. So don't shrink your range. Don't edit your rhythm. You are not background music. You are a song with crescendos and drops, high notes and raw silence. And the man who's truly alive, he won't just listen. He'll feel it. And he won't know why he keeps replaying it in his mind. But you will. Now let's go deeper. In the next part, we'll talk about what happens when you stop seeking connection and begin choosing it. Not from need, but from a place of power. No, 3, she doesn't need completion. She chooses connection. She doesn't need him. That's what makes him stay. You can feel it when she walks into a room. There's a quiet steadiness about her, not cold, not distant, but whole, as if she's already home inside herself. She isn't searching. She isn't reaching. She's not asking anyone to fill the spaces she's learned to hold with grace. This isn't arrogance. It's individuation, the word Jung used to describe the process of becoming a whole, integrated self. Not a half waiting for its match, but a sovereign being who has called all her lost pieces home. And when a woman reaches that place, when she no longer sees love as salvation but as invitation, everything shifts. Because here's the truth no one tells you. Real intimacy doesn't come from merging. It comes from choosing. Choosing to share space with someone without collapsing into them. Choosing to love without losing shape. But for so many women, that kind of love feels foreign. We've been trained to contort, to mold ourselves into what we think someone wants, to anticipate their needs before they speak, to dim our light so they feel bigger in the room, to mistake devotion for disappearance. You know the story. You meet someone, and slowly your edges begin to blur, your routines shift, your boundaries soften. You stop calling your friends back. You start asking questions like, what are we? Instead of asking, what am I becoming in this? And at some point you look in the mirror and realize you're still there, but quieter, less vivid. We don't talk enough about the grief of losing yourself in love, because it's so easily mistaken for romance. But she knows better now. She doesn't vanish in his presence. She expands. She doesn't wait to be chosen. She chooses from a place of clarity, not hunger. And that kind of energy, it terrifies boys, but it mesmerizes men. A man who hasn't done his own inner work may mistake her independence for rejection. He may feel unnecessary. He might even resent her wholeness, because it forces him to face his own emptiness. But a man who's grown, who's wrestled his own shadows and made peace with solitude, he doesn't need her to need him. He just wants to stand beside her, to witness her, to be welcomed, not as a rescuer, but as a companion. And that's what she's looking for now. Not a hero, not a fixer, not someone to complete her story, but someone whose story can run alongside hers without needing to rewrite her chapters. You see, wholeness isn't the absence of longing. It's the presence of self. And when she knows who she is, when her worth isn't tied to someone else's gaze, she becomes magnetic in a different way. Not loud, not flashy, but deeply felt. She becomes the calm in the storm. The woman who doesn't chase because she's not afraid to be alone. The woman who doesn't demand because she knows her energy is already an offering. She chooses connection, not because she's incomplete, but because she's already full. And she has something beautiful to share. And that, my friend, is rare. That's the kind of woman a grown man remembers, the kind he doesn't try to possess because he knows he's been invited. And that invitation, it's sacred. So if you've ever wondered whether loving without losing yourself is possible, the answer is yes. But only when you stop waiting to be chosen and start remembering you were always enough. In the next part, we'll explore why mystery isn't about silence or withholding, but about sacredness, and how knowing what not to give can be the very thing that makes you unforgettable. Number 4. Mystery isn't silence, it's sacredness. There's a common myth, one women are told again and again: be mysterious, one play hard to get, keep him guessing. But let's be honest, most of what's taught as mystery is just manipulation in a silk dress. Silence used like a weapon, withholding used like currency. That's not mystery, that's theater. True mystery, real unforgettable mystery, isn't about saying less. It's about holding something sacred. It's knowing what belongs to the world and what belongs only to you. There's a reason some people linger in our minds longer than others. It's not always about beauty or charm, it's about presence. And more than that, it's about the sense that there's more than meets the eye. Psychologists call it the Zeigarnik effect, the idea that our minds cling to the unfinished, the unresolved, the unexplained. It's why we obsess over the text he never answered, the story she started but never finished, the moment when someone looked like they were about to say something and didn't. That pause, that ellipsis, it becomes a doorway in the mind, one we keep walking back through, wondering what was behind it. But this isn't a strategy to create suspense. This is a truth about human psychology. We are drawn to the things we can't fully grasp. The people we sense have more beneath the surface. And when a woman lives from that place, when she stops oversharing to earn closeness, when she no longer spills her soul like it's proof of worthiness, something shifts. She doesn't disappear. She deepens. Not because she's hiding, but because she's rooted in the knowing that intimacy doesn't come from exposing everything too soon. It comes from discernment, knowing when to open and when to hold. From understanding that not everything sacred needs to be spoken. Some things are meant to be felt. This is the essence of the Sophia archetype, the highest level of feminine development in Jungian psychology. She's not seductive in the way the world expects. She's seductive in a deeper way, through wisdom, through inner radiance, through quiet self-possession. Sophia is mystery incarnate, not because she's elusive, but because she's vast. You don't chase her to win her. You approach her with reverence because something about her tells you not everything about her is meant for you. And you accept that because you'd rather know one honest layer of her than touch all the shallow surfaces of someone else. She's the kind of woman who makes you want to earn the next sentence, to sit in silence just to feel her presence, to return again and again because you sense there's more and you want to be worthy of it. That kind of mystery can't be faked. It's not a game. It's a frequency, a way of being that says, I'm not afraid to be seen, but I choose who sees what. You don't have to reveal your entire heart on the first night. You don't have to explain your past just to prove you're open. You don't owe anyone your story until they've shown they can hold it gently. And when you live that way, not closed off but sovereign, you become unforgettable. Because the truth is, mystery is not something you perform, it's something you become when you live deeply enough that not everyone can follow. Let the world wonder, not because you're hiding, but because you are finally choosing to keep the sacred things sacred. In the next part, we'll step into the softness that most women were taught to abandon. Why reclaiming gentleness is not weakness, but the boldest revolution of all. So let yourself be layered. Let your story unfold like chapters, not headlines. Let your presence speak louder than your explanations. Because when a man senses that your mystery isn't manufactured but earned, he'll realize he's not chasing a performance. He's being invited into a sanctuary. Number 5. Softness is the new revolution. She's exhausted. Not from lifting weights or long hours, but from carrying the invisible burden of always needing to be the strong one. The woman who never cries in front of others. The woman who holds families, friendships, and lovers together, even when she's falling apart in private. We live in a world that praises strength but misunderstands softness. And so many women, maybe you too, were taught to armor up, believing that being soft would make you weak, breakable, forgettable. But what if that was never true? Real softness isn't the absence of pain, it's the ability to stay open inside it. It's crying without apology, laughing too loudly, holding someone without needing to fix them. It's walking away from disrespect not with rage, but with quiet certainty. Psychology today called it a reclamation. This return to softness as power, not as performance, but as presence. A woman who has nothing to prove, nothing to control, who is soft not because she hasn't suffered, but because she has, and she still chose to remain kind. One woman in the comments wrote, "I used to be the girl who always had to be tough. Now, I choose gentleness, and not a single soul dares to mistake that for weakness anymore." That sentence, it cracked something open, because it wasn't about shrinking herself, it was about reclaiming her essence. Carl Jung said the shadow we repress becomes our fate. And for so long, feminine softness has been shoved into the shadow, mocked, dismissed, feared. But now, women are bringing it back to the surface, not as fragility, but as fire wrapped in silk. Because here's the truth. The most powerful energy in the room is the one that doesn't need to dominate it. A woman who can say no without raising her voice, who can love deeply without losing herself, who can forgive without forgetting her worth. That is soft power, and that is a revolution no one sees coming until it's already transformed the room. So she no longer needs to shout to be heard. She no longer needs to match masculine energy just to survive. She doesn't armor herself in sarcasm or indifference. Instead, she leans in with intention. She speaks slowly, listens deeply, and moves through the world as if her softness is a shield made of velvet and steel. Not because she's untouched by life's chaos, but because she's mastered how to remain intact within it. This shift isn't loud, it's quiet. It happens in the subtle ways she begins choosing herself, leaving conversations that feel like emotional labor, taking long walks instead of explaining her soul, crying without turning away from the mirror. There's a fierce kind of grace in that, a woman who lets herself feel and still refuses to break. And men feel it too. Not the kind of men who are looking for someone to save, but the kind who have tasted noise and now crave depth, the kind who can sit beside a woman in her softness and not try to harden it, because they sense what it took for her to get here. They know softness isn't where she started, it's where she returned after the war. The world is just beginning to understand what women have always known deep in their bodies. Softness is not the opposite of strength. It is the evolution of it. It's the strength that no longer needs to prove itself, because it is itself. And that's what makes her unforgettable. She doesn't compete, she doesn't convince, she simply radiates. She's the calm after the storm, the warmth that lingers when everything else has faded. You don't chase her, you slow down to meet her, because to rush her would be to miss her entirely. In a culture obsessed with high performance, dominance, and noise, a woman who lives from this quiet depth becomes magnetic. Not because she demands attention, but because she honors herself. And that soft, strong, sacred is the revolution. In the next part, we'll explore what it means to be the woman a man grows through, not the one he wins. Because when you become a space for transformation, love stops being a transaction and starts becoming a legacy. Number 6, be the place he grows in, not the prize he wins. There's a certain kind of woman who doesn't just turn heads. she turns lives. She's not remembered because she was the most beautiful or the most charming or even the most available. She's remembered because something about her made him grow, because in her presence he felt both exposed and expanded. Carl Jung once wrote, "What you resist persists." And when a man resists becoming, when he clings to who he's always been, he'll find himself drawn again and again to the woman who won't let him hide there. That's you. But let's be clear, you're not his therapist, his savior, or his project. You are the mirror, the catalyst, the wild, steady force that reflects who he could be if he let go of what keeps him small. It's not about fixing him. It's about being rooted enough in your own growth that simply by being, you inspire his. And that's the woman a man remembers long after she's left the room. The one who didn't try to impress, didn't try to earn love, didn't bend herself to his potential. She just lived in her wholeness. And because of that, he had to rise or retreat. There's a concept in psychology: the more we invest in something, the more attached we become. It's not manipulation, it's human nature. When someone gives time, effort, emotion, they start to see what they're investing in as valuable. Sacred even. So ask yourself, are you letting him invest? Not in gifts, not in grand gestures, but in reflection, in presence, in truth. Too often women are told to give everything up front, our attention, our energy, our bodies, our vulnerability, before the man has even shown up with intention. And we do it not because we're desperate, but because we're taught to prove we're worth keeping. But when you give too much too soon, he doesn't have to choose you. He just receives you. Instead, let there be space. Let him show up with something real. Let him participate in the energy exchange. Let him risk a little discomfort to meet you where you are. Not because you need that effort to feel validated, but because he needs it to feel invested. Men don't stay because they win a prize. They stay because they've grown inside something sacred. Because your presence became a place of transformation, not of transaction. And here's the paradox. The more he's had to bring himself to the table, the more he's had to confront his ego, shift his habits, learn new emotional languages, the more deeply he roots into you. Not out of dependence, out of evolution. He doesn't remember the woman who gave him everything. He remembers the woman who made him question who he was and imagine who he could be. So no, you don't have to demand effort. You don't have to chase commitment. You just have to stop giving what hasn't been earned and trust that the right man will want to rise to meet you. And when he does, he won't see you as a prize he won. He'll see you as the place he became a better man. And that stays with him forever. In the next part, we'll explore the mirror effect, how your energy reflects what a man has yet to integrate, and why it can make him either love you or run from you. Because growth isn't always comfortable. Sometimes it looks like tension. Sometimes it feels like confusion. But when a man meets a woman who doesn't rush to soothe his uncertainty, who instead holds her center and lets him navigate it, something rare happens. He steps up, not to win her, but to meet himself. That's the alchemy. You didn't force it, you allowed it. You were simply a space he didn't want to leave because in your presence he glimpsed a version of himself he could finally respect. And that kind of transformation, it imprints forever, Prince. No 7, you are the mirror, not the mask. There's something no one warns you about. When you start living from your depth, people won't always like it. Not because you're doing anything wrong, but because depth has a way of holding up a mirror. And most people aren't ready to see what's in it. Carl Jung knew this well. He wrote that we're not just drawn to others, we're triggered by them, inspired, repelled, obsessed, or confused. Not because of who they are, but because of what they reflect back to us. The unseen, the unlived, the shadow. So when a woman walks into a room fully inhabiting herself, not just her light, but also her darkness, something primal happens. Not loud, not theatrical, but powerful. She becomes the mirror, and the mirror doesn't judge, it just shows. To the right man, she's magnetic. To the wrong one, she's terrifying. Because when a woman lives in full integration, when her softness doesn't cancel out her strength, when her intuition doesn't discredit her logic, she challenges every binary he's ever believed in. She doesn't fit in a box. She breaks the box just by existing. This is the power of inner yin-yang, not balance in a neat, Instagrammable way, but true coexistence, fluidity, the ability to hold contradiction without collapse. You've been told to choose, be nurturing or be assertive, be the mystery or be the rock, be feminine or be strong. But what if the most magnetic thing about you is that you don't choose? What if your very essence is the refusal to split yourself just to make others more comfortable? Because here's the secret. The men who are doing the real inner work, the men who aren't afraid to meet their own shadow, they'll recognize you instantly. Not as a performance, but as a mirror. Not as a muse to be possessed, but as a presence that makes them remember. You don't have to perform mystery. You already are the mystery when you stop wearing masks to be chosen. You don't have to hide your fire to be seen as gentle. You don't have to dim your softness to be taken seriously. You are not a contradiction. You are a complete expression. And when you live from that place, when you stop editing your energy to be more digestible, you create space for a different kind of relationship. Not one built on illusion, but on revelation. He sees himself in you, not the polished version, but the raw one, the one still becoming. And maybe for the first time he wants to keep becoming, because your presence gives him permission to drop his own mask. That's the kind of love that doesn't just feel good, it transforms. So no, you don't need to learn how to be more desirable. You just need to keep living your depth unapologetically. The man who's ready for that, he won't just be drawn to you. He'll recognize himself inside you, because mirrors don't attract through effort, they attract through reflection. And sometimes the deepest form of love then is to be truly seen. Next, we step into the closing truth, the essence beneath it all. You were never meant to chase magnetism. You were meant to become it. Let's finish the journey together. He won't fall for you because you dazzled him. He'll fall because in your presence, something ancient and unnamed wakes up inside him. A longing not just for connection, but for meaning, for wholeness. And that's why your depth is never too much. It's an offering, a reminder, a return. You're not a mask to impress. You are a mirror to remember. And only those ready to face themselves will stay long enough to truly see you. Number 8. The Untouchable Muse. Why he never forgets you. There are women who are remembered because of what they gave, their time, their body, their love, their tears. And then, there are women who are remembered simply because of who they were. Not because they tried to be unforgettable, but because they never tried to be owned. She is the Untouchable Muse, and he never forgets her, not because she belonged to him, but because in her presence, he touched something he couldn't name. She doesn't chase attention. She doesn't demand permanence. She doesn't ask to be chosen. She simply is, fully, hauntingly, and unapologetically. The muse archetype isn't the woman you understand. She's the one you feel. The woman who doesn't need to explain her silence, who doesn't soften herself to be more palatable, who walks like she knows the stars know her name. She's not mysterious because she withholds. She's mysterious because she exists in dimensions you haven't traveled yet. In the comments of this very conversation, we saw it reflected. She wasn't trying to be magnetic, she just was. He came back obsessed. But the truth is, I had already moved on. Because the muse doesn't wait. She doesn't anchor herself to the story someone else writes. She lives in her own myth, her own motion, and others are lucky if they get to witness even a moment of it. That's what makes her unforgettable. Not because she gave herself away, but because she left an imprint, a spiritual fingerprint, a vibration in the air that never quite settles. And here's the most beautiful part. She doesn't need to be held in anyone's memory, because she isn't looking to be remembered. She's looking to be felt, in the marrow, in the moment, in the space between breath and meaning. She lives for presence, not permanence. You see, when you stop trying to be unforgettable, when you start living so fully in your own truth, your own tempo, you become the kind of woman who lingers, not in his bed, not in his phone, but in the architecture of his soul. He may move on, he may love again, but part of him will always return to that quiet ache, the memory of you, not as a person he had, but as a portal he couldn't fully enter. And that is the paradox. You were never his to lose. You were simply a moment of truth he wasn't ready to hold. So don't ask to be held. Don't beg to be remembered. Live so completely in your essence that the right ones will feel you, even in your absence. You are the muse. Not because he says so, but because you chose to be art, not performance. In the end, magnetism was never something you wore. It was something you became by returning home to yourself. And that's the kind of presence no one ever fully forgets. He may search for you in other women, in late-night conversations, in songs he once dismissed. He may try to replicate your energy in places where it doesn't belong. But the truth is, you weren't a chapter. You were a mirror to a version of himself he glimpsed but couldn't hold. And some mirrors don't shatter. They vanish. That's why he remembers your silence more than someone else's declarations. Why your absence echoes louder than another's presence. You became a metaphor, a symbol, not a body to return to, but a doorway he'll long to reopen every time his soul feels quiet. You are not unforgettable because of effort, but because of essence. Not because you asked to be seen, but because you refuse to dim. So stand still in your storm. Shine quietly in your own myth. The man who's meant to see you won't just remember you. He'll recognize himself in you. And that's when the story begins. Not for his desire, but for your destiny. Don't be chosen. Choose. You are not a map. You are the forest, untamed, lush, alive in ways that don't need explanation. You were never meant to put up signs or light a path just to be found. The right one will enter only because they are drawn, by instinct, by soul, by the quiet gravity of your presence. Stop asking how to be loved. Start asking how to be felt, so deeply that even silence between you and another leaves a trace they carry for years. You don't need to be chosen to be worthy. You choose, you become. Not a performance, a presence, not a reaction, a reflection.